Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. My name is Angie Sosa. I'm the Associate Director for Off-Campus Engagement. I work with the folks over in Residential Life and Learning. You may have interacted with me in the past in a previous role that I held overseeing operations. I have been doing off-campus engagement here at the university for just under 7 years, but we're going to be focusing heavily on that over these next however many years to come. We know that it is something that is always a concern for our students, both undergraduate and graduate. And so we want to make sure that students understand that there are resources available for you here at the university, as well as, things that can help you while you're already living off campus. This particular session might have some similar information from previous webinars that we've held. If you've attended any of those in the past, it'll go over some general information about pricing, things to think about when moving off campus, things to be concerned about. But we're also going to be predominantly focusing towards our students who are international, specifically because there are some things that you might encounter as international students that you're not expecting or are a part of the application process and moving off campus that we want to make sure that you have information for and can be properly prepared for. Um, of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. I'm joined today by Sophia Alfred and Sylvia Kohut from the International Center, who will be interjecting as necessary. They have been working with students off of this topic for a while as well, so they can share some important details that they have encountered as well, but they may be taking a look more at the question and answer area. As I mentioned, since I'll be doing a big portion of this webinar, I may not be able to see the Q&A area, but we will have some time towards the end for questions. But please feel free to go right ahead and leave those messages and we'll go from there. Sylvia or Sophia, would you like to say anything before we kind of get started?
I'll just introduce myself quickly. So, as Angie said, my name is Sophia Alfred. I work mainly with graduate students in the School of Engineering, but if you come into the International Center on Mondays or Wednesdays, I'll be here and happy to help you. And yes, Sylvia and I will be monitoring the chat, and if there's questions that are related to you specifically as an international student looking for housing, we're happy to help you with that.
Great, thank you. So we're going to be very general as possible. So if you have specific questions, we definitely recommend making an appointment with someone from the International Center, or you're more than welcome to make an appointment with me, and we'll have some information towards the end of the webinar on how to go ahead and do that. But this information is going to be very general. A lot of the stuff that we see typically from students who are looking for off-campus housing. So we just want to make sure that we can at least get you all started on what some of those basics are. So I'm going to jump forward um, to what we're going to be covering today. One, it's really important to understand where to start, understanding where you are in the process. I know that this being November 20th, for many people, this can feel very late in the whole process, but I want to, make sure that I clarify that this is not late at all. You are right on time. This is predominantly for you to be educated on the process, and we want to make sure that you understand like what are the things that go into it so that when you do have to make this decision, whether it's something that's happening in the next couple of months or in the next couple of years, that you kind of know what to expect. We'll go over some general information regarding necessary paperwork, things that you might need to provide potential landlords or brokers, or questions that you might get asked to provide. We'll go over some finances, and that'll include just general information about what the costs of things are for living off campus, how to go about like forming a budget and whatnot. For any students who are receiving financial aid or scholarships from the university, we'll briefly touch upon that as well. Some challenges that might pop up, things that you may not have thought about, that can be a little bit of a wrench in the entire process. We'll make sure that we kind of go over some of that stuff as well. And then if there's any questions that you all want to ask or general questions that you can ask when you're looking at spaces, we'll point you in the direction of some resources for those as well. Again, like I said, this is going to be very broad of a webinar, but we do urge you to put any questions or anything that you might have in our Q&A, and we'll go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, it is not too late. You all are right on time. There are students who sign leases as early as August, a year prior. And there are also students who sign leases a couple of weeks beforehand, and that's totally fine as well. There are certain things that we want to make sure that students understand before they kind of jump into this process. And a lot of that is really asking yourself a lot of questions. Are you ready to sign a lease? Is this your only option? Things of that sort. When students make the decision to sign a lease early, there are several things that we want to make sure that they're understanding. As you can see, they're listed here on the screen. Predominantly, it's leaving you with a little bit of time to, plan for contingencies. So whether or not your finances are going to stay the same, if your life circumstances are going to stay the same, if your friend group will stay the same. And I know a lot of people will think, oh, of course my friend group is going to stay the same. We're all living together now and things are great. It's also November. So we want to give you a little bit of time to ensure that, you're feeling comfortable with the group and things are working out. The difference between living in on-campus housing and living in off-campus housing is in on-campus, if we need to make room changes, we can go ahead and we can do that, dependent on availability. When you're living off campus, you're signing a lease with a single landlord. They more than likely only have that one space available. They're probably less likely willing to work with you about some of those challenges. So we want to make sure that whatever decisions that you need to make in going into this situation, you are doing as much thinking about it as possible. The other thing that is a challenge about signing a lease so early is the supply and demand. And if you have any basic understanding of what that means, you understand that, when there seems to be a small supply, the demand, or when there's more demand, rather, there's a small supply and vice versa. And so that can be really challenging when people are looking for a particular type of housing in a particular location, etc. Because of that, landlords do profit off of your stress in this situation. And so we want to make sure that you are really educated in going forward with this. That means that, landlords might, be more able to put stipulations on how quickly you need to sign a lease or how quickly you need to renew a lease. I know there's plenty of students who sign a lease in August, they move in late August, September, and the landlord would like them to sign the lease, for another year shortly thereafter, but they haven't really had any time to live in a space to determine whether or not that's going to be a good setting. So we want to make sure that, you all are educated on going forward and that you're not being taken advantage of in these particular situations. That includes educating yourself. So there's a lot of students who jump into these processes who are not really clear on what they need to be aware of, what type of information they should be, looking out for, etc. So we really want to make sure that you all at least are entering it with that information at first, and then we can kind of go forward from there. So where do you start? Well, you're going to have to ask yourself a few hard questions. What are some of those non-negotiable items? Do you have any deal breakers? Is location going to be a change? Is the cost going to be a challenge? If you have parents or families who are involved in the decision making, what are their concerns? Many times those folks want to be very involved in what that looks like. They want to make sure that you're going to be in a place that's going to be beneficial for you, is safe, etc. And so you want to make sure that you're including them in those conversations. Have you considered any alternatives? Would living on campus be preferred? Did you get a lottery number? Did you get a wait list number? Are you interested in theme housing, etc.? Are you looking to go abroad? Have you considered subletting? So these are a lot of things that you really should be thinking about before actually jumping and signing a lease. And we want to make sure that, you have actually determined, nope, this is what my plan is. I have no intentions of going abroad. My parents are behind me in whatever decision I make, etc. Excuse me, that way, once you actually go to sign that lease, you are comfortable with it. If I haven't already mentioned this, a lease is a legal document that you are tied to. It basically says that you are in agreement with the landlord to pay a certain amount of money to rent living in that space for a certain amount of time. And whether or not you change your mind does not mean that you are exempt from making those payments. And so it can be very expensive, and we want to make sure that you all have thought about that. Finances is number two. That is a huge element. And so we are going to spend a good chunk of time in this webinar discussing that. Making a budget and really understanding how much money you can provide or use for, your housing expenses is going to be important. If you're on a scholarship or you're getting any type of financial assistance, you want to make sure that that information is up to date, and that way how much you can actually afford, whether it's, money that is being given to you from the university, in addition to any money that you have on the side, if you're working or anything like that. Um, have you considered circumstance changes or anything? Like I said, it being 2024, we're a few years removed, but I'm just recalling back in 2020 when the pandemic hit, we had a lot of challenges with students who weren't able to get out of their leases. And that was a big concern when schooling is not looking the same. And so we want to make sure that, not hoping that we'll have another pandemic or anything like that, but it could be that, maybe a parent lost their job, or maybe someone is ill, or maybe you have to take a leave from the university. We want to make sure that we're planning for those types of things. And some of those things we're not going to know until it actually happens. And so that's something that's just what it is. But it could be important to have those conversations with a potential landlord just so that I've discussed if something were to pop up, this is what that process would look like. Another thing is whether or not you have an established credit history. Are you going to require a cosigner or a guarantor? So these are big questions. And for our international students, much of the time they do not have these things. And that is something that we're going to chat about as well. How we can go about, getting around that particular question, or what other types of documentation we can provide, how you can go about looking for a cosigner, et cetera. And then having those hard conversations with friends and family. You want to make sure that you're on the same page as your potential friends. You want to make sure that your family or whomever is going to be helping support you during this process is on board with it as well. A co-signer or a guarantor is someone who can help cover the costs unless in the situation that you can't cover those costs. And so you want to make sure that there's someone that you can depend on. You want to make sure that there's someone that is going to come through in those difficult periods of time. And then you want to make sure that you and your friends and your future housemates are on the same page with what some of those non-negotiable things are with living together. I've seen it plenty of times where students, might disagree with one thing, and that kind of seems to dissolve the group. And so we want to make sure that, you're having those hard conversations, you're being upfront about what your expectations and your deal breakers are, so that way you know what it is when you're getting into it. Now we're jumping into finances. So normal costs for rents in the area are approximately $800 to $1,300 per month, not including utilities, and that's per person per month. Most of these apartments hold anywhere from 3 to 4 people. So you can just do the quick math on that. You're looking at a pretty penny per month. Utilities are things that you are going to have to cover. That includes gas, electric, internet. Those are things just to keep things running in the space, making sure you have ample heat, that you can utilize your stove, et cetera, that you have access to, internet for homework needs, et cetera. That is an estimated about $150 per month per person, and that is variable. A lot of that is going to be based on how much is used. And that's also going to be split between everybody in the house. So I say 150 just to kind of give you a good number to estimate on, but it could be less, it could be more. It also depends on how many people live in the space. Food, transportation, and personal costs are all variable. That's really dependent on the person. But I always recommend finding ways with your housemates or even friends to try and figure out how to go about saving money in certain areas. If you don't have a need for a vehicle, let's not have a vehicle. That could be an additional insurance charge. It could be a parking charge. It could be gas, etc. For foods, I recommend going to wholesale clubs and whatnot. So that way you can save money on larger bulk items that you're purchasing with maybe some of the people in your house. Um, it's not linked here, but if you go to our resources page on our offcampus.tufts.edu website, you'll be able to see a version of our budget worksheet, which kind of helps you split out some of those costs and really get an idea for how much money am I going to need at the beginning? How much money am I going to need from month to month? You can also give a call to utility companies ahead of time just to kind of estimate what those utilities are going to look like. We're putting together a utility list. So just some details for people to be able to reach out to different companies and see, you know, hey, can you give me an estimate of what the average cost for electric is throughout the year per month? They can do that if you give them the address location. And so that's a really helpful tool as well. And as I mentioned, if you have a vehicle, those are things that you'll have to think about. I can go into a little bit more detail about that, but it's not 100% necessary. If it's not registered in the city of Medford, or not, excuse me, if it's not registered in the state of Massachusetts, then it's going to be difficult to really do anything with that. But, something that you could think about if you have a vehicle is what the Tufts parking process looks like as well. So I urge you all to take a look at that as well. So just talking about your Tufts bill and refunds and whatnot, and this is really helpful for everybody, but I do have a bit of a note at the end. If you have a taxable scholarship or you're receiving some sort of financial aid from the university, um, you will likely continue to see that. If you have particular questions about that, please reach out to your financial aid representative and they can go over your particular situation. But more or less, you're charged on your Tufts bill for tuition and fees, for housing and for board. That includes food and whatnot. The difference between living in on-campus housing and off-campus housing is when you live off campus, your bill is not going to have housing or board, which means that if you're receiving any additional money from the university, you could potentially see a credit on your student account for the amount that you were receiving. That you can take out as a refund, and that can go towards paying for some of your off-campus housing expenses and whatnot. So that's something to really think about. You'll see that the bill looks a little bit different because that's not going to be there. But if you're living in on-campus housing, you'll see that. I'll go into the next slide with a little bit of more detail about like what some of those numbers look like, just to kind of give you an estimate of what we're talking about. But something to really keep in mind is that when you're living in on-campus housing and you're receiving any funds from the university, that is only covering a 9-month period that you're in school. So typically August through May. That means that June and July, and sometimes August, well, September through May, excuse me, June, July, and August are not covered by the university. And so that is likely going to be a cost that has to come out of your pocket and that you'll have to figure out. In these particular situations, sometimes students are working and can put money towards their housing expenses, or sometimes they're subletting their spaces to someone who might need it over the summer period. There's various options, and we have different ways that you can go about seeking that information, but we want to make sure that you at least have that in mind for future possibilities. So just kind of discussing, how much apartment can you afford? As we were chatting about with the cost of attendance, how much money goes into your housing costs versus your food costs and whatnot over that 9-month period. You're estimating a little bit over $2,000 a month to cover your rent, your food, and all utilities, which all of that is included in your Tufts University housing costs. With that said, when you're moving off campus, you can take a look at it as this $2,065 per month. However, like I said, that's only over that 9-month period. So you really want to see what does that work out to for a 12-month period. Trying to stay beneath that is going to be really helpful for you. Having conversations with, potential friends who are looking to sublet, maybe you can potentially swap out spaces with them. That's also really important. The last bullet point that's on this page is something that is really important that I want to make sure people understand is those, we did already talk about the 3-month difference between living on campus and off campus. But when you move into an off-campus space, they are requesting some money up front. That includes the first month of rent, the last month of rent, and a security deposit. If you're working with a broker, you may be asked to even pay a broker's fee. So that can be anywhere from 2 to 4 months up front, really depending on what the landlord has worked out with you. Some landlords are willing to work with you. They're willing to negotiate. You could potentially get on a payment plan, lots of different opportunities there. But that is something to really think about. And each one of those things are going to be no more than the cost of 1 month's rent. So if you're sharing a space with three other friends and each person is responsible for $1,000 a month, that means in order to move into the space, you personally, will have to come up with $4,000 before moving into the space. So that is something to really prepare for. This is a bit of a breakdown between what the costs are for our juniors and seniors who live on campus and our graduate students who live on campus, next to what it looks like to live in a standard four-person apartment off campus for that period of time. So feel free to take a screenshot or anything like this. I won't go too far into detail, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of what you're looking at in terms of what the costs are. This is really dependent on, your particular needs, whether or not you're looking for a meal plan, etc. So really keep an eye on those different things. As you can see, it is fairly average to what it would be like living in on-campus housing. The disbursement just changes over the period of time because of the number of months that you're doing that. So this is where we get into the thick of it with our international students, is specifically about paperwork and whatnot that you might be asked for when you're moving off campus. Um, there are certain things that, a landlord or a broker want to make sure of before they agree to rent to you. They want to make sure that you are a good tenant. So meaning that, you haven't had any issues in your previous living experiences. So for there, you might see on the fourth bullet point down is a residency verification. They might ask for that from Residential Life. They might send us a document that says, hey, can you fill this out about this student? Just to kind of give us a heads up on what type of a tenant they are. Do they have any disciplinary issues or anything like that? They're also going to want to make sure that, you have a proof of income. Proof of income means that you have the money to be able to cover the cost. And because many international students are not working, or if they are working, most times they're working an on-campus job, that can be a little bit challenging because the amount of money that you're getting for that particular work may not seem like it's more than enough to cover the cost of living off campus. My understanding also, and I'll let any of the folks from the I Center pop in on this one as well, is that international students are also given their I-20 at the beginning of their college career here, which kind of gives a little bit of a breakdown of what type of, things to expect, what you are planning to spend your money on, etc. And that can help with, the landlord or the broker in understanding that, like this is something that you all have determined, but it is your personal document and it is not something you necessarily need to present to them. However, it can be helpful in some places. Um, Folks in iCenter, would you like to add anything on to that or anything?
I think that is a good summary. If your landlord is asking about the what the funding section of your I-20 means or anything like that, you can always direct them to the iCenter website that has more information about what an I-20 is, and that could help. And if you have questions, you can definitely reach out to your International Center advisor.
Great, awesome. You'll see the first bullet point here is social security number. And I'm sorry I'm jumping around, but I want to make sure that I'm like kind of doing it in a particular order. Your social security number You likely will not have that unless you have an on-campus job. And a lot of students who have an on-campus job, you've gone through the process of getting that document. A lot of that is kind of how the United States is able to kind of like keep a log of like who is working here and whatnot. That way they can take applicable taxes and whatnot out of your costs. But this is also how landlords or brokers are going to check your credit history. That is if you have a cell phone bill that you're paying, or if you have a credit card that you've been using. Checking your credit history is just a way for them to say, okay, they have this amount of money that they are responsible for paying every month, and they have been responsible in paying that, meaning they've paid it in full, they've paid it on time, etc. That's basically the way they're gauging whether or not they're going to receive their rent on time, etc. And the more on time and accurate that you are with that stuff, the higher your credit score is. And so those are those things. However, because most people or most international students do not have that, they don't have the credit history. Even if they have a social security number, it doesn't mean that they would have a credit history. And many students, even if they're not international, don't have an established credit history. But because of that, a lot of students may kind of run into a little bit of a wall with the landlords, like, I don't have any information about whether or not you're going to be a good tenant, which is where that conversation about the cosigner or the guarantor comes in. Most times, whenever you're using a cosigner or a guarantor, you want to use somebody who does have an established credit history, who has a fairly good credit history. That way, most times they're going to apply for the house as well. And then the landlord will say, okay, this person is this person's cosigner. So if you aren't able to make appropriate payments, they can go to that person to get that money. So that's really important. You might also be asked for proof of enrollment, which is that last point there. It's likely unlikely, but it is something that is possible. So if you are asked about that, you can go to student services to get any documentation. I put this on the screen because I want to make sure that, whether or not it's something that you will end up needing is really relative to the person that you're working with. However, it can be really beneficial to have all of these things prepared before you actually start doing the search at signing leases, etc. That way, everything is ready. You can hand it over as needed. They can review it as necessary, and it doesn't prolong the process. A lot of people will get held up in the length of time that it takes to get necessary paperwork. So if you're able to get any of this documentation in advance or anything like that, that's going to be really helpful. I would also recommend that whenever you're having conversations with potential brokers or landlords, that you're upfront and saying, hey, listen, this is my circumstance. I don't have X, Y, and Z. And so what's going to be the best way or best type of documentation to get you that information? That way they know what to expect. Now, if you run into a situation where that person, that landlord or that broker no longer wants to work with you, or is seeming like they don't want to work with you as a result of whatever we're talking about, specifically having to do with, the fact that you're an international student, or the fact that you have, some time to get certain paperwork or anything like that, you might want to make an appointment with me just so that we can talk over what those situations are a little bit further. We don't want to get into a situation where the landlord is unwilling to work with you because you're an international student. That is a serious challenge and difficulty. And we want to make sure that we're not running into any issues of discrimination with that situation. So please feel free to set an appointment with me. And like I said, I'll have that information at the end of this webinar just to kind of give you a little heads up on how to move forward with that. Okay, so if you're ready to begin your search, you feel like you're a little bit more confident in like what we're going over. These are really the ways that people are finding stuff. If you're looking on Facebook, I would urge you to take a look at the Facebook Marketplace. There are lots of Tufts off-campus web pages, like Facebook pages. None of them are managed by our office. So I do want to make sure that you understand that. Anywhere that you find housing, whether it's through Facebook, word of mouth, apartments.com, even our website, you want to use your due diligence. Okay. I've already kind of given you the breakdown of what are the typical costs. So if someone is potentially showing you a space that is well beneath that number and it's a beautiful space, you want to be cautious. That space might actually be a scam, and we don't want you to lose any money. So, right off the bat, do not send any money before you have physically been in the space, seen the space, spoken to people about it. That is a really big thing that happens a lot to a lot of people, and we want to make sure that they're not falling victim to that. So, Facebook is a place to start, word of mouth. Craigslist is still in use. Zillow or apartments.com are also options. You can also look at our website, which the link is at the bottom of this slide, offcampus.tufts.edu, which is actually in partnership with apartments.com, but requires you to log in using your Tufts username and whatnot. The other thing is that we have a little bit more control over being able to pull certain information down. So if you run across anything that seems like it's a scam or you've personally visited it and it was a scam, you can let us know and we can have the developers remove that from the site. But those are all things that we really want to make sure that we're working together with, checking on those things, um, and using your due diligence in really determining what is going to be a suitable space for you. You can also run those questions by me or another administrator just to kind of get our perspective. But just keep in mind that, we don't want you to jump and do something that's going to put you in a little bit of hot water. So there are also some things that a lot of people don't think about when they're moving off campus, specifically our international students may not be expecting this. Most off-campus housing is not going to be furnished. So that means that you're going to have to locate furniture of your own. We have a lot of resources to assist in either lower cost furniture or rental furniture. So that's stuff that we can definitely help you out with locating. You can also connect with other students who might be giving things away. The only thing about acquiring used items, whether it's through another person or something that you found or something you got offline, is that you want to make sure that, it's in fairly good shape. Unfortunately, sometimes people throw things away because it's not in good shape, whether it's severely damaged or it's got bugs or anything like that. And those can potentially become problems later on. So we want to make sure that you're catching those things ahead of time. Um, you are likely going to be responsible for all of the utilities, which means that different things are going to have to be set up in specific ways. So, someone that you live with, the utility bills, the electric bill might be under their name, and the gas bill might be under someone else's name. The internet bill might be under your name, etc. But you want to make sure that you have that information and understand how it goes. So that way, those are things that you can properly prepare for. The last thing, and is actually one of the more important things, is renter's insurance. Renter's insurance is really important because it can help you in the event of any losses that come about, whether it's from a burst pipe, from a fire, from natural disasters, anything like that. And most renter's insurance is easy to set up and is really cheap. It can cost as low as $10 a month. Um, some landlords do require it, but many of them do not. Something to keep in mind is when you sign a lease, your landlord's lease is likely going to say it is your responsibility to have renter's insurance. Your landlord might have homeowner's insurance, but that homeowner's insurance isn't going to cover the things inside. So your computer, your clothes, any jewelry, anything like that. Their homeowner's insurance is going to cover the structure of the space. And that's just really making sure that those things can be replaced at a later time. So highly recommend looking into that, and just doing your research and whatnot and finding what is best for you. Here are also some resources, very, very general resources to kind of help you along your process. We've got information for the International Center, financial aid and student services, as well as off-campus housing. I urge you all to double check our off-campus Canvas page. Lots of people post there for sublets and whatnot, so we can definitely, help you find some things there. I will actually be doing a webinar next month in December, so actually in a couple of weeks, for subletting in particular, just kind of going over what type of questions asked, things to look out for, and things of that nature, just to kind of make sure that those people are ready and kind of ready to go for what that looks like, because it is a little bit different than just renting. But that is our presentation. I'm going to leave this screen up, even though our next screen says questions, just so folks can, ask anything that they have. And in the interim, I'm actually going to stop our recording.